The True Believer, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements by Hoffer. Chapter 17, The Practical Men of Action, Section 113. A movement is pioneered by men of words, materialized by fanatics, and consolidated by men of action. It is usually an advantage to a movement, and perhaps a prerequisite for its endurance, that these roles should be played by different men succeeding each other as conditions require. When the same person or persons, or the same type of person, leads a movement from its inception to maturity, it usually ends in disaster. The fascist and Nazi movements were without a successive change in leadership, and both ended in disaster. It was Hitler's fanaticism, his inability to settle down and play the role of a practical man of action, which brought ruin to his movement. Had Hitler died in the middle 1930s, there is little doubt that a man of action of the type of Göring would have succeeded to the leadership, and the movement would have survived. There is, of course, the possibility of a change in character. A man of words might change into a genuine fanatic or into a practical man of action. Yet, the evidence points that such metamorphoses are usually temporary, and that sooner or later there is a reversion to the original type. Trotsky was essentially a man of words, vain, brilliant, and an individualist to the core. The cataclysmic collapse of an empire and Lenin's overpowering will brought him into the camp of the fanatics. In the Civil War, he displayed unequaled talents as an organizer and general, but the moment the strain relaxed at the end of the Civil War, he was a man of words again, without ruthlessness and dark suspicions, putting his trust in words rather than in relentless force, and allowed himself to be pushed aside by the crafty, fanatic Stalin. Stalin himself was a combination of fanatic and man of action, with the fanatical tinge predominating. His disastrous blunders, the senseless liquidation of the kulaks and their offspring, the terror of the purges, the pact with Hitler, the clumsy meddling with the creative work of writers, artists, and scientists, were the blunders of a fanatic. There was small chance for the Russians to taste the joys of the present, while Stalin the fanatic was in power. Hitler, too, was primarily a fanatic, and his fanaticism vitiated his remarkable achievements as a man of action. There are, of course, rare leaders such as Lincoln, Gandhi, even FDR, Churchill, and Nehru. They do not hesitate to harness man's hungers and fears to weld a following and make it zealous unto death in the service of a holy cause. But unlike a Hitler, a Stalin, or even a Luther and a Calvin, they are not tempted to use the slime of frustrated souls as mortar in the building of a new world. The self-confidence of these rare leaders is derived from and blended with their faith in humanity, for they know that no one can be honorable unless he honors mankind. Section 114. The man of action saves the movement from the suicidal dissensions and the recklessness of the fanatics, but his appearance usually marks the end of the dynamic phase of the movement. The war with the present is over. The genuine man of action is intent not on renovating the world, but on possessing it. Whereas the life breath of the dynamic phase was protest and a desire for drastic change, the final phase is chiefly preoccupied with administering and perpetuating the power won. With the appearance of the man of action, the explosive vigor of the movement is embalmed and sealed in sanctified institutions. A religious movement crystallizes in a hierarchy and a ritual. A revolutionary movement in organs of vigilance and administration. A nationalist movement in governmental and patriotic institutions. The establishment of a church marks the end of the revivalist spirit. The organs of a triumphant revolution liquidate the revolutionary mentality and technique. The governmental institutions of a new or revived nation put an end to chauvinistic belligerence. the institutions freeze a pattern of united action. The members of the institutionalized collective body are expected to act as one man, yet they must represent a loose aggregation rather than a spontaneous coalescence. They must be unified only through their unquestioning loyalty to the institutions. Spontaneity is suspect and duty is prized above devotion. Section 115. The chief preoccupation of a man of action when he takes over an arrived movement is to fix and perpetuate its unity and readiness for self-sacrifice. His ideal is a compact, invincible whole that functions automatically. To achieve this, he cannot rely on enthusiasm, for enthusiasm is ephemeral. Persuasion, too, is unpredictable. He inclines, therefore, to rely mainly on drill and coercion. He finds the assertion that all men are cowards less debatable than that all men are fools, and, in the words of Sir John Maynard, inclines to find the new order on the necks of the people rather than in their hearts. The genuine man of action is not a man of faith, but a man of law. Still, he cannot help being awed by the tremendous achievements of faith and spontaneity in the early days of the movement, when a mighty instrument of power was conjured out of the void. The memory of it is still extremely vivid. He takes, therefore, great care to preserve in the new institutions an impressive facade of faith, and maintains an incessant flow of fervent propaganda, though he relies mainly on the persuasiveness of force. His orders are worded in pious vocabulary, and the old formulas and slogans are continually on his lips. The symbols of faith are carried high and given reverence. The men of words and the fanatics of the early period are canonized. Though the steel fingers of coercion make themselves felt everywhere and great emphasis is placed on the mechanical drill, the pious phrases and the fervent propaganda give to coercion a semblance of persuasion, and to habit a semblance of spontaneity. No effort is spared to present the new order as the glorious consummation of the hopes and struggles of the early days. The man of action is eclectic in the methods he uses to endow the new order with stability and permanence. He borrows from near and far, and from friend and foe. He even goes back to the old order which preceded the movement and appropriates from it many techniques of stability, thus unintentionally establishing continuity with the past. The institution of an absolute dictator, which is characteristic of this stage, is as much the deliberate employment of a device as the manifestation of a sheer hunger for power. Byzantinism is likely to be conspicuous both at the birth and the decline of an organization. It is the expression of a desire for a stable pattern and can be used either to give shape to the as yet amorphous or to hold together that which seems to be falling apart. The infallibility of the Bishop of Rome was propounded by Irenaeus, 2nd century, in the earliest days of the papacy, and by Pius IX in 1870, when the papacy seemed to be on the brink of extinction. Thus, the order evolved by a man of action is a patchwork. Stalin's Russia was a patchwork of Bolshevism, Tsarism, nationalism, pan-Slavism, dictatorship, and borrowings from Hitler and monopolistic capitalism. Hitler's Third Reich was a conglomerate of nationalism, racialism, Prussianism, dictatorship, and borrowings from fascism, Bolshevism, Shintoism, Catholicism, and the ancient Hebrews. Christianity, too, when after the conflicts and dissensions of the first few centuries it crystallized into an authoritarian church, was a patchwork of old and new and of borrowings from friend and foe. It patterned its hierarchy after the bureaucracy of the Roman Empire, adopted portions of the antique ritual, developed into the institution of an absolute leader, and used every means to absorb all existent elements of life and power. Section 116. In the hands of a man of action, The mass movement ceases to be a refuge from the agonies and burdens of an individual existence and becomes a means of self-realization for the ambitious. The irresistible attraction which the movement now exerts on those preoccupied with their individual careers is a clear-cut indication of the drastic change in its character and of its reconciliation with the present. It is also clear that the influx of these career men accelerates the transformation of the movement into an enterprise. Hitler, who had a clear vision of the whole course of a movement, even while he was nursing his infant National Socialism, warned that a movement retains its vigor only so long as it can offer nothing in the present, only honor and fame in the eyes of posterity, and that when it is invaded by those who want to make the most of the present, the mission of such a movement is done for. The movement at this stage still concerns itself with the frustrated, not to harness their discontent in a deadly struggle with the present, but to reconcile them with it, to make them patient and meek. To them, it offers the distant hope, the dream, and the vision. Thus, at the end of its vigorous span, the movement is an instrument of power for the successful and an opiate for the frustrated.